During Halloween, this is what my doorbell looks like. It's located above the flashing biohazard symbol, and to the left of this big electrical box. Stepping back and looking, the whole thing seems to be mounted on the inside of a spaceship wall. To get to my doorbell, you have to walk past the flaming skull on the house, through the graveyard with the tree monsters and dragons, gingerly step around a large tarantula, avoid the rat that severs people's arms off, and walk down this long corridor. There, now you're in the right frame of mind to be pressing my doorbell button. When you do find the button, it'll be guarded by this predator creature.
Who dares take my
Now that ought to get your blood flowing. And this is what it looks like when it's darker out. If you'd like to build a doorbell just like this for yourself, keep watching and I'll tell you how to do it. Let's start by talking about parts. As you can see, this doorbell is going to be considerably more complicated than just a button. This gag electrical box is the main reason why I built the doorbell. You can buy this at any Halloween store normally, and I got this one at a store called Big Lots for 16 bucks. Download a biohazard symbol off the internet. You'll print that symbol onto some translucent vellum. Harbor Freight flashers, you'll need at least 3 of them. Rope light, conduit, a sea sponge, and some other miscellaneous stuff such as a switch, steel, both flat and angled, wood, paint, primer. Oh yeah, and a big sheet of 18 or 16 gauge steel. My goal here is I want it to look like it belongs on a spaceship, so my sheet of metal has to look like hull plating. To accomplish this, the first thing I'll do is make a template. I want the hull plates to run at a 45-degree angle, so the perfect tool for this job is a carpenter square. It's already set to 45 degrees. Once the first set of 45-degree lines is drawn, go ahead and complete the other set of 45-degree lines. That'll complete each individual hull plate. And there you have it, one completed template. I used carbon paper to transfer the template over to the metal, then went back and darkened the lines with a Sharpie so I could actually see them better. Then I took my cutting wheel and cut a groove everywhere where I had a line. Since you're doing it freehand, go slow and take your time. And that's how you create spaceship hull plating. Now, an electrical box just sitting there with conduits hanging out would look really suspicious. So let's change that and add some conduit and make it look like the electrical box is actually going somewhere. For this, we'll use PVC pipe. To make the bends in the pipe, I use a torch. You want to quickly sweep the torch back and forth along the pipe. If you hover in one spot for too long, things will go horribly wrong. Once the pipe starts to sag where you're heating it up, place it in your formwork and hold it until it cools down. Now let's measure and mark this pipe so we can cut it. Okay, let's make a second junction box for the other end of these conduits. This time I'll make it out of wood. Drill holes in the end of the wood so that the conduit can go into them. And don't worry, we'll paint all this stuff up to look better later. Place your fake conduit box about 1/4 of an inch in from each of the edges. I'll show you why later. Mark its location and then drill 2 holes. Install 2 flathead screws. Mark where each of your conduits is located. Then drill holes. And then you can use screws from the back to secure the conduits into place. Primer the wood and then paint the whole thing conduit gray. Fill in these gaps with sealant, and while you're at it, Spread sealant over the entire assembly to break up all the smooth lines and give it an aged look. Remember that sea sponge from our parts list? That'll make the perfect applicator for putting your final paint job on your conduit. We need to build a glass-covered biohazard symbol. Hop on the internet and download yourself a JPEG file. Then print it onto this translucent vellum. You should be able to pick this up in an office supply store. Head on out to your scrap pile and get yourself a piece of glass from an old microwave door. It needs to be cut down to size, but my glass cutter wouldn't even scratch it. I think maybe it's made out of kryptonite or something. So I broke out my electric high-speed cutting wheel. You don't want to push too hard and you don't want to go too fast. You are, after all, grinding on a piece of glass. You should then be able to break the glass anywhere where you've scored it. Clean the glass with some solvent. Then use a hot glue gun to carefully reapply the original rubber gasket around the edges of the glass. Your glass is ready to go. Lay your glass on top of your biohazard symbol, mark it, then cut the translucent vellum to size. Lay out your Harbor Freight flashers and experiment with different combinations of paperweights to see how much you want to dilute the flashers. When you're happy with how it looks, mark the paper and cut it. Finally, take electrical tape and tie it all together. One completed biohazard symbol. Let's create a nice metal frame to hold our biohazard symbol. It will be made out of 1/2 inch angled steel. The first cut is the easiest, just to make two 45-degree angles and weld them together. All of the following cuts will be cut slightly larger than your biohazard symbol, and your 45-degree cut will be based on that line. And here's where that project gets fun. Break out your plasma cutter and start cutting. Did I happen to mention how fun plasma cutters are? After all the pieces are cut, weld it together with your MIG welder. Then grind the weld smooth. One completed biohazard frame. We need to go back to our sheet metal and cut out a square for our biohazard symbol. For the first cut that I just did, ensure that you're far enough in from the edge to accommodate a wood frame, your rope light, the wood frame for your sheet metal, as well as the metal frame for your sheet metal. Now you can finish cutting out your square. Hang on to that square piece of steel, you'll need it later. Now that the hole's cut, we can weld the biohazard steel frame into place. Tack weld it from the top edge, and now that it's in place, flip the whole thing over and weld it from the back side. If during welding you provide too much heat, you'll warp your sheet metal. So to prevent this, complete your weld using a whole series of short little tack welds. Next, we're going to weld some washers into place to hold the sign. Grind the bottom of the washer flat so it'll rest against the sheet metal, then weld them into place. These washers will be used to hold a wood frame that you're going to build that's big enough to hold your biohazard sign. Notice the screws through the washers to hold the wood frame. Install your glass biohazard symbol facing the front of your display. Remember that square piece of metal you didn't throw away? Well, this is where we're going to use it. The Harbor Freight flashers are magnetic and will stick to the steel. Then the steel can be placed into your wood frame. Cut a thin piece of plywood as a backing for your flashers. And I use this really thick tape as a hinge. But you can use metal hinges if you wish. Then I tie it all together with a hot glue gun. We have a plywood panel, then a piece of cardboard as a spacer, and then we'll have the steel. Now you're done building your biohazard symbol. It's time to mount our electrical box onto our steel. Using a piece of paper, make a template of the electrical box. Include a cutout showing where you're going to access your on-off switch and where you're going to mount your screws. Transfer that information over to the metal. Take a long piece of steel with neodymium magnets attached to it. This will make an easy-to-use guide for making straight cuts. Cut out the hole that you're going to use for accessing your on-off switch. Hang on to that little piece of metal, you're going to need it for the button. Then using flathead screws, attach the electrical box from the back side. Now you have access to the on-off switch as well as the wire that's going to go between the electrical box and the button you're going to install. Once the conduit was installed, trial and error showed me that actually having the conduits touching each other won't work. So I trimmed the electrical box conduits so they don't touch each other. Remember that small piece of metal you cut out? Well, now we're going to use it to mount the button. First, you want to mark the center of the piece of metal. After the square hole will be cut out, this little metal wing on the button, click into place and hold it against the sheet metal. The square is drawn to the exact dimensions of the inside of this lip. Using calipers makes this a very easy job. I cut it out using a grinder, but with how long it took me on the grinder, I would have been better off just to break out the plasma cutter and use that. Plus, less rework. Well, there we have it, one finished button plate, all polished up. Now back on the main project, we want to cut a hole slightly larger than the button. Operationally speaking, the polished metal plate's not really required, it's more for decoration. Once the metal button is in place, throw some decorative tack welds on there. Remember, we're trying to make this look like a spaceship wall. Now it's time to wire it up. Take the two wires that come out of your electrical box, run them over your button and hook them up to two of the contacts. Here's the neat thing. This button has multiple contacts, so you could actually route a wire to your real doorbell. So in addition to scaring the kids, it'll let you know that there's kids out there. Now we need to provide some support for our sheet metal. To do this, I welded some 1-inch wide flat stock around the entire perimeter of the project. Again, I used a series of tack welds, both to prevent warping and to give it a good look on the other side. Additionally, you remember I said to mount your conduit away from the edge of the project. Well, this is why, because you were going to weld a piece of metal there. You'll also want to provide a series of tack welds along the outside edge. Looking at the front of the project, you can see the discolored metal every place I put a tack weld. That's exactly the look I was going for. Since I didn't weld all the way across, and I don't want any light leaks, go around the entire inside of the project and run a bead of sealant. Then black spray paint on top of this will stop all light leaks. Before spray painting, I have a little more welding to do though. I want to install washers all the way around the inside of this project. This is so I can route a string, which will in turn be used to hold my rope light in. Welding's all done, break out the black spray paint. Next, build a wood frame to fit on the inside of the project. Create notches each place you have a washer, so that your string can go into it. And the height of the wood frame will be the same height as the biohazard frame. Spray paint your wood frame black. And while that paint's drying, use your plasma cutter to blast holes into your metal frame. These holes are going to be for your sheet metal screws to hold the wood frame in place. Now that we actually know where everything's going to be mounted on the front of your project, break out your grinder and start cutting. I'm trying to create gaps on our simulated metal plates that would allow the light to leak through and show up at night. When you're all done, this is what it'll look like. Well, without the light, of course. Go back, add your string, take your wood frame, and screw it into place. Finally, put your rope light in. The last step is to cut a piece of cardboard that'll fit over the back. Spray paint the cardboard black to protect it from the weather, and then secure it to the wood frame using flathead screws. The cardboard should have a small flap so you can access the on-off switch of your electrical box, as well as an opening that will allow you to open up your flasher door so you can turn your flashers on. Well, that's it. You're all done. It's time to start scaring kids and passing out candy.